Hi, I'm John Stevens,
This is Matt Russell.
and this is Pod Have Mercy.
This is Pod Have Mercy.
So, welcome back.
Thank you, John.
You celebrated your 25th. It's hard for me to say 25th anniversary last week.
We did.
For the show, and you did something fun. I hope. Good.
We kind of had the staycation. We stayed at home. We tried to
COVID anniversary.
We tried to dodge our children as much as possible. So it wasn't.
How did that work?
It wasn't the 25th that we were hoping for, but it was the one we got.
Good.
So it was good. It was good. I love that woman. So very, very grateful.
Now, but you all did. Well, I don't want to pry too much into your
Go
personal
ahead, John.
life,
You know.
You guys
there.
did some questions for each other,
Oh, we
like
did.
we
did.
Personal relational questions or something.
So I found something. Somebody sent me a while ago called 30 Questions to Fall in Love, and I just put that on my Evernote, and I pulled it up, and we started just asking each other those questions over the 2 days we spent together.
That's amazing.
It was great.
That's awesome.
So we ate, we walked, hung out, we just did some yard
So
work.
can you and I just pull up one question?
Oh,
you and I
yeah.
can do one.
I like some of these questions. Let's get the magic going here, John.
Yeah, on your Evernote. Not that this is our 25th anniversary, but I mean
We're on our way.
We've
We're
been
on our way.
we've been doing COVID podcasts for like 18 years. In the middle of Saharan desert.
You just want to pick a number. There's 30 of them. You just want to pick a number, and I'll.
What do you think, Jeff? What number?
It's the 19th episode.
19. This is the
okay.
19th episode.
Okay.
We're going to ask question 19.
If you knew that in 1 year you would die suddenly, would you change anything about the way you're living? Why?
If I knew I was going to die in 1 year, would I change anything about the way I'm living? Mm-hmm. Well, I think the correct answer for anyone would be yes, I would change a lot about my life. But, I don't know that I'd change a lot about my life. I try to live like my life in such a way as I don't know how much time I've got. Mm-hmm. Sounds like I'm like a guru or something, which I'm not. I'm probably just too stupid to know any better. But I would say, I think the stock answer is I'd quit my job and I'd travel around the world. But it's COVID. I can't go anywhere anyway, so I might as well just figure out how to make this thing work. That would be me. How about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you. I feel like in some ways I'm where I'm at. I want to be doing what I want to do with the folks I want to do it with, and so I feel like it's all kind of lined up in this really beautiful way. And I think I might slow down a little to savor, because at times I can move a little too fast. So I think I'd slow down a little to savor, but I don't know if I'd change anything.
Hey, I keep thinking about Thomas Merton says that we're always trying to discover the purpose of our life. And so I've met so many people who struggle with the purpose for their life.
Yeah.
But he also says that some people's purpose in life is to continually wrestle with what is their purpose in life. So it always, so when people like, I have a new opportunity, I'm going to move, what do you think? Should I, I'm like, dude, this is it. You go with where you feel you need to go.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wonder if, like, when we've talked about the Enneagram in the past, if different numbers on the Enneagram struggle with the meaning or purpose, and like I know 4s do.
What's a 4?
A 4 on the Enneagram they're kind of really unique numbers. They kind of live in this heart, head, gut space. I think they live out of their heart space. My wife's a 4 and I'm a 7, and so we said if we ever write a book, it's going to be called Tall Tales and Sad Stories, because the 4s like to be in the wallow a little. They like to kind of feel the pain.
Really?
And 7s try to stay away from that stuff.
And 8s just deny it altogether, don't we? It's just,
I don't know. 8s
we own it.
Yeah, you're not afraid of it. You're not afraid of the pain. You call it for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think you want to control the pain. Eights want to make sure that they're on top of it. They don't like to be on the bottom side of pain. You know, usually.
The eight's basic fear is of being harmed or controlled by others.
Yeah, controlled by others. Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want that. That's funny. What's four's basic fear?
I think losing identity. Let me look
Yeah.
at it. It's identity related issue.
It is because they struggle with having.
What's the
makes
seven's
sense.
fear? I want to know what Matt's fear is.
My basic fear is fear.
Of no coffee at the podcast.
Of being deprived and in pain is the basic fear.
Being
Deprived of
deprived.
pain. A lot's been going on in this past week.
Yeah.
The world is just. We are going to go through this pandemic and come out on the other side. I'm more and more convinced every day that it will be nothing like we went in. And anyone who is longing for what it was or thinks it's going to be what it was is going to really have a hard time.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I do. I think about the Kubler-Ross stages of grief in a sense when things change abruptly, the process you have to go through to really accept the change. You know, and I think right now there's a lot of folks that are either in denial or they're pushing back against it or they're reaching back to what they want to have happen. And I think the stages that we're in is, I mean, I think whatever it's interesting to me, we started talking about this podcast about the future of the church, thinking about that's something that we were going to somehow participate in creating.
Yeah.
You know, and now it's here. It's like, oh, we're adapting to the
Well, now it's like
reality.
being on that whitewater rapids. You're
Yeah.
just being carried down and you're doing the best you can just to stay on the
Just to stay
boat
afloat.
until you get to the bottom. But
Yeah.
this is going to be a much longer ride than anyone thought.
Yeah. But I also think, I mean, this may be a little crazy on my part, but there's a part of me that's not excited about the pain, not excited about obviously the turmoil and tension, but there's also, I think about that text in Hebrews where Hebrews says that God is shaking the things that can be shaken so that those things that cannot be shaken will remain. And I don't particularly think that God shakes stuff up, you know, but I think that the reality is that our world is shaking, and that it gives us a chance to really look at what does Christianity mean to me? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus in the world? You know, what claim does it have on me? And so in a lot of ways, it's focusing my attention and my faith in these times in ways that I could somehow avoid outside of it.
Well, the Bible does use the terminology of a refining fire.
Yeah.
Where all the dross, you know, sort of,
Yeah.
and then you're left with a pure gold, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that whole concept of suffering produces, you know, patience, and patience, endurance, character. And I think wherever you are in these days, you're suffering from the loss of something.
Yeah.
And I'm just afraid that you're going to have our culture is going to be even more divided with people who refuse to accept that things are changing.
Yeah.
They don't want to change. They don't want the world to change. And you've got a world that is okay with everything
Changing.
melting, the dross being or refining or sifted, and they're okay with that.
Yeah.
That's what I think you see with the arguments around the COVID deal with science. I think you see it around race. I think you see it around politics. And in some ways it causes more division, because just like in any epoch epic in history, you've got people who are trying to hold on to what was, and people who are trying to push to change to what should be or will be or they hope to be, and you've got a lot of people in the middle try to find their place.
Yeah. I think that's right. And there's not a solid place to stand. You know, those things that we think, you know, whether it's the economy or whether it's kind of some cultural mores, everything is quaking. And I think that's where, at least as you and I continue to talk about, being followers of Christ, I think about here's this one that calls his disciples out on something that's not sustainable, the water, and says that there's something else that can carry you if you keep your eyes on me. And so I think in terms of being a pastor and in terms of being Christians in the world today, what does it mean to keep our eyes on the one that leads us into unsustainable places? Because when I look at the future, I think, it doesn't look sustainable. But this is the God that always calls us to the unsustainable places and sustains. Water, desert, 16-year-old girl that's pregnant. I mean, all these things are not sustainable. And this is the stories of our faith.
I've been struck by the last couple of weeks, and not a lot of people, but I think some people have said, wow, y'all are talking a lot about race. Can we just move on? Or, all you've talked about the last 3 weeks is racism. And I don't know that that's true, although it has been a huge central topic of conversation. It makes me think, though, Jesus, the Bible is filled with conversations and teachings and admonitions about racism and racial disparities.
Yeah.
Whether they be Jews and Gentiles or Jews and Samaritans or men and women and, all the sorts of conversation. So the fact that we've had, 3 or 4 weeks of conversation around race, and now some are willing to be done with that. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know whether to be, maybe it just speaks to the human condition of people who are in power and comfortable, but I don't know. Are you a NASCAR fan?
Can I be honest, or I don't know how. No, I'm not.
No, that's fine. I'm not either. I will say my brother my brother used to be a really big NASCAR fan, and my stepfather before he died was a huge NASCAR fan. As a matter of fact, one year for Christmas, I found a tire. It was a candle made of it looked like a NASCAR tire with no tread on it, and it had like the Goodyear whatever on it. And when you lit it, it smelled like burning rubber.
Probably,
and he loved it because it's what a racetrack smelled like. And he used to go with some friends to Talladega or Atlanta Speedway, and they would stay in the RV, and they would make a whole weekend of this whole thing. So he was really into the sport, knew all about it and everything. And man, it's just become center of our culture.
Yeah.
I think NASCAR as a sport, I would say, is way down there with pickleball and cornhole, which now is a big sport because it's the only live sporting event on TV. NASCAR fans, please forgive us. Yeah. We're joking. Don't send any messages.
I didn't think turning left was a sport, though, but I don't know.
I think there's a great skill in driving, and I did learn it's a team sport. The drivers are the celebrities, but there is a team sport. You have a pit crew. There's a philosophy of when do you pit, when do you gas, and how do you change tires, and everybody has to operate as a team. And you have a crew chief, and you have a spotter, and there's just all this levels of communication that I think are fascinating. Yes. But this past week, NASCAR, which has traditionally been considered a Southern sport. It was born out of running moonshine illegally. I did not know that. Oh yeah, it was born out of drivers who were, running across state lines with illegal moonshine.
Running from the law.
Like the old Dukes of Hazzard, and it became a sport where they just got on dirt tracks and they raced against each other until it became a really big major sport with a lot of sponsors. So it's a very Southern sport, racing, and it's expanded all around. And you have the only right now top-tiered African-American driver, Bubba Wallace, who spoke out in the midst of a lot of the racial issues that we find ourselves, a lot of the conversations around Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd. And he spoke out. He said, for too long we've allowed these Confederate battle flags, the stars and bars, to be flown inside. And he pushed to have those removed. And NASCAR, to their credit, said they won't be allowed anymore in Now you got to think about.
I was shocked.
This is fascinating to me. Think about who pays your bills and who your fans are. There's a lot of sports that could come out and say a lot of things, like the NBA, and it's not as harmful for them. But for NASCAR to do this is potentially much more damaging. To me, I think at least you get some credit because it's potentially way more dangerous for you and your sport to make that move in that direction than it would be maybe for some other sports. And I don't want to make light of any change that we see in our society, but I don't know. I think that's huge. And then, of course, this past week in Talladega, in Alabama, they come into the garage and there's a noose hanging in Bubba Wallace's garage. And, of course, there's an investigation going on. But we saw something in Talladega on Monday of this week where all of the pit crews and all of the drivers and everyone pushed his car with him in it up to the front of the line.
Really moving.
Yeah.
They all walked. And
they all walked behind him, pushed his car up to the front of all the cars as a symbolic gesture of love and support, saying, we're together on this. We're a family on this.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the church is, but the church broke out on that track because it seems like that's what the church does, and what Jesus people do is to surround the folks that are the most vulnerable and are and have the most to lose, and to say no, or to say we got you, or to stand in solidarity. There's something Jesus about that.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's one of the reasons why, white churches need to talk more about racism.
Yeah.
Because I think for far too long, we've been very comfortable in our position. We've been in a very privileged position.
Yeah.
We haven't had to worry about a lot of things. This is the thing too about you and I talked earlier about white privilege and what churches can do. To make a difference, especially what can white churches do. And I've found that something someone sent me I thought was fascinating about white privilege. Whenever you say white privilege, I think, well, first off, we heard this from Christian Washington a couple of weeks ago, who is a friend of ours and a pastor on staff here at Chapelwood at the Upper Room. And he said something that now I have noticed over the last 3 weeks to be true in every conversation I've had about race with white people, that including myself sometimes, is that we tend to personalize everything related to racism. It's like, well, I'm friends with black people. Well, I didn't deny them a scholarship. Well, I didn't have slaves. Well, I didn't, I didn't.
Right.
Whatever. And it's this lack of the heritage and the institution and sort of the legacy that we live under, a recognition of that. But the other thing is when you talk about white privilege, people don't want to admit that because they say, I struggled when I grew up. Everything wasn't given to me.
Sure.
And I think about my own life. And I grew up, my parents were divorced. My dad left when I was 14. I started working at 14 years old. Nothing was ever given to me. I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have any of that, right? So I have a lot of hardship and trial and tribulation in my background, but not one trial or tribulation or struggle or hardship that I ever faced because of the color of my skin.
And I would suggest that most of the doors that were open were also open because of the system that you and I were a part of and are a part of that worked out because of the color of our skin.
Well, I happened to be called into ministry into the United Methodist Church, which is one of the widest denominations there is. And so if you can string a sentence together and, you look halfway decent and you know how to tie a tie and you don't have crumbs on your shirt, you can actually move up and do all right. But I'll never forget years ago in Columbus, Georgia, when we were having a conversation about race way before I even knew what any of this stuff meant and what it. I was so ignorant and still am. But I remember a pastor in Columbus named Earl James, who had almost 40 years of ministry under his belt.
Yeah.
And here I am, brand new. And I got my suit and I got my tie, and I'm an associate at a big steeple, one of the biggest churches in South Georgia, at St. Luke in Columbus, Georgia. And he's serving a small black church, M.L. Harris. And here I am in my first appointment, and I make what he makes after 40 years of ministry.
Wow.
I'm just getting started.
Wow.
And I remember him saying, I don't remember exactly what he said or the way he said it, but I remember it stuck with me, is that I'm not going to have the same opportunities you have. I'm not going to have, I don't have the availability to serve the places you're going to serve, never be able to make the money that you're going to make. I mean, I was at the beginning, and all I remember was feeling so mad and angry at him for like accusing me, you know what I'm saying, of something. And I look back on it now, and I just think we have a denomination that had a system and a structure in it that didn't allow for
Still does.
black pastors. Black pastor serves a black church. Well, there's limited number of black churches, and those black churches don't pay the same as white churches. They don't have the same number of people. Or, I remember whenever you talked about starting a new church in South Georgia, I don't remember them ever planting a black church in a black community.
Yeah.
And guess what? There's black folk in South Georgia. There's a lot of black folk in South Georgia. But no, they would put the conference money or the new church start money into a suburb in a nice area where that church could survive and raise money or whatever they wanted to do. And that was the consistent pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if like one of the resistance to talking about whiteness is that when we begin to do this, like there's a deep sense that like I'm holding on to something I didn't know. It's almost this feeling of telling people or feeling like we're being told that you're wrong, right? Where I think the question is for me, one of the questions that's been helping me is, Matt, do you want to be liberated into deeper freedom in Jesus? And if I can answer that, then everything else that has been constructed, socially constructed in my world, I can say, I offer this up to you to liberate me in any way you want to, Jesus, right? And so if the world I was given was really constructed to suit some people and not others, and Jesus calls me to a world in which there's neither Jew nor Greek or slave or free, right? There's this kind of equity that's happening, that I can say, oh, yeah, I was born a Greek. I was born in a privileged Greek Senate kind of family, or a society. And the call is to become more than that. The call is to work towards something more than that. And so I can look at my whiteness not as like I'm a bad person, but to say, oh, like fish in the water that they swim in. Oh, this is the water I've been swimming in. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm going to have these characteristics. What journey could I go on that might bring me liberty out of these things? What might Jesus be doing right now that if I look at something called white privilege and beyond my own resistance, because when I was starting this journey, John, I had so much resistance about that word, because like you, I'm not privileged. This is this, and this. And I can step back now on this journey and go, oh, I understand what that is. Yeah. I was able to navigate this world a lot easier because of the color of my skin. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the fact that I have to now deconstruct it so that thing is open, that possibility is open to people of all tribes and nations. And, when I think about the kingdom of God and what it's going to look like, that's the world we're looking for. We're all gathered around the throne of the Lamb from every tribe and nation, and we're all sisters and brothers, whatever that's going to look like, right? Yeah. And that's what we're fighting for in Houston.
I think if you're a Christian, you should, I've always thought back to organizational culture where they talk about espoused values versus theories in use.
Okay.
Espoused values are the things you say you believe in. The theories in use are what you actually do, the way you actually live. And I found there to be this disconnect in a lot of organizations, corporations, but particularly in churches where you say, everyone's welcome here, but then you actually don't put into practices, you don't have practices that make everyone feel welcome.
Yeah.
Right? So the espoused value doesn't match the theory in use. So espoused value will be your mission statement, your vision statement, but your theory in use is what you actually do. And your theory in use is the truth. That's who you are. It's what you do. Mm-hmm. It's like when these football players like rip off somebody's helmet and attack the quarterback and they hit him, or or they beat up their girlfriend and it's caught on video or whatever, and they go, I want to apologize to those who were offended. That's not really that's not me. And I'm like, oh, that's you. It wasn't somebody else who did that.
Yeah.
Now, you might have had a bad moment. But that's you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not. That's you. That's who you are. I think I can tell you of folks in the church who will tell you, they'll say to you, do you believe everybody's welcome in this church? Oh, yeah, I believe everybody's welcome in this church. But if somebody who looked different and it didn't fit their definition sat on their pew next to them, the thoughts that would fill their mind or the things they might actually even say would be repugnant.
Right.
And yet they'll tell you, I believe everybody's welcome in this church.
Yeah.
That's where you have a disconnect between your espoused value and your theory and use. And what Chris Argyris says in his book Knowledge and Action is that when we don't recognize that there is a division there, that's the biggest flaw of transformation and human growth, is when we don't see the disconnect. And I'm telling you, I think vast majority of people don't see the disconnect. They really believe the espoused value is the way they live their life.
Right. Right.
And until you get there where you can see it, you really are not ever going to make any growth.
Yeah. I keep coming back to like the Gospels and just keep seeing Jesus, the way that he preaches and teaches and who he hangs out with is this massive paradigm shift, because like his espoused values and his, what's the other?
Theories in use
were lined up, right? So he would talk about in the Torah, the widow, orphan, the stranger, and you see him standing with those folks. You see, what the Pharisees say, even the prostitutes and the tax collectors are attracted to him, which wasn't a compliment.
And a lot of times what works really well is typically people who have a disconnect between espoused values and theories in use are real big. They live in the espoused values. They talk about those a lot.
Yeah.
And what Jesus had a tendency to do is he didn't really talk about the espoused values until he was confronted with his theories in use. Yeah. So he was eating dinner with sinners and tax collectors. That's when the Pharisee goes, hey, why are you eating with all these sinners? He goes, well, let me tell you, the well don't need a doctor. It's the sick that need a doctor.
Let me tell you why your espoused values are causing you.
Yeah. So he was confronted, and this is where you say, don't tell me how much you love me, show me how much you love me. This is the basic principle of life. And so I'm always, I've learned through the years that the people who send me the emails and who talk a lot and who complain or they have a gripe or they this or they that or whatever, it's all espoused values. And rarely have I seen theories in use from folks.
I think the first century church struggled with a form of racism when you have James and the apostles, right, that wanted to stay in Jerusalem and make it a Jewish sect. So Christianity was going to be a reformed movement within the Jewish sect. And when Paul comes along and really kind of pushes Peter into it as well. And Peter ends up showing up at these Gentiles, these folks that are on the other side of the tracks, that are not included, that have been kind of the folks that they have denigrated, and begins to eat with them, right? All this stuff kind of goes nuts, because no longer are the folks in Jerusalem calling the shots. They're being pulled out into a new way of seeing the world. And in many ways, the church has been able to operate in its own power structure, so it doesn't need the world. And so now, with the world kind of in flux, it's being pulled into a place that says we have to begin to, our power structures, our love, or the way that we view impact, all those things have to be discussed.
Well, but to carry on with that illustration, Peter, talking about the values that he carried versus theory and use, he went and he did it, but then he got blowback
Lots.
from the home base.
Right.
And then he refused to do it. And Paul says, I had no small dissension in debate. I mean, he basically confronted him.
Yeah.
And that's a nice way of saying, I let him have it.
Yes.
For saying,
Yes.
you say you believe in this, and yet you're not willing to sit down and
But
have
you
a
go
meeting.
home and you're talking-
You separate yourself from them.
That's right.
And there's a racial component there.
Absolutely.
So this is, look, people who are just don't see this in the scripture. It's always been there. And I think we're all becoming more awakened, aware of it, which, I'm glad it's happening now. I wish that it had been earlier. But you think about the timeline. We're only, 50 years removed
Yeah.
from civil rights in our country. And a lot of that, as we've talked about here before, still in the South, you have a lot of that that's still in existence in a lot of these cities and towns. I don't know. I mean, it seems like to me, at least for me, but I think a lot of people are waking up with the dark night of sleep for generations and generations, which is really sad. And so I actually feel for my black brothers and sisters who are like, it's about damn time that you actually started just seeing like a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think they know we're not there yet. The fact that we're like where we are is better than where we were.
Yeah. I think about all the poetry that talks about waking up and staying awake, that and even the Gospels that talk about, not going to sleep, and how important it is for us to stay awake, to let the Spirit do what the Spirit's going to do in us, so that we can become the church that God is calling the church to be in this time and for the future. Right?
I'm also struck by one of the most haunting verses in the Bible to me is at the end of the Gospel of John, when Jesus looks at John and he says, when you were young, you'd rise up in the morning and you put on your tunic and you'd wrap your belt around you and you would go wherever you wanted to go.
Yeah.
He says, but when you get old, you rise up and you put on your tunic and someone else fastens a belt around you and they take you to places you do not wish to go. And I think there's Jesus. I don't know that anyone knows exactly what Jesus is saying. He's just talking about old age. I think he's also talking about there's a time and a place in your life where you're taken to places where you need to go, but you didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't always go willingly, but there are places that we need to go.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I feel like I am.
Me too. I've noticed this last couple of weeks, as I come to the realization, talking with you and some other folks, that in some ways my faith hasn't cost me a lot. It hasn't cost me a ton of things. And I feel like with COVID, some of the tension that we're in now, this kind of world that we're looking at, continuing with, I realize, it's going to cost more. It will cost more than I was hoping it would in some ways. And there's a liberty about that. There's a joy in that. There's a deep sense of Jesus is saying, I got you. I got y'all. Just keep walking,
It will cost you more. That's a good note to end on. I'm John Stevens.
And I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.